I want to thank you for having this hearing in the wake of the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement, or so-called Free Trade Agreement. Needless to say, we would focus on that, and it is a shame that we don't have a single representative of American workers here. But of course, that agreement was never about American workers. It was only about profits for giant corporations on both sides of the Pacific. I'm sure it'll achieve that purpose. Mr. Hill, or Ambassador Hill, one of the issues, now that we've signed this agreement, both sides are supposed to enter into discussions as to whether Kaesong and similar facilities in North Korea will be considered part of South Korea for purposes of the agreement. Now, that would allow goods to come into our country duty-free, produced, some would say, by slave labor. In any case, certainly not by those who are free to decide to bargain over their own working conditions. Now, Appendix 22B, I believe it is, it had a different number, says that before the executive branch can agree to that, there's supposed to be some involvement of the United States Congress. The current administration has issued a statement stating that it would not finalize such agreements without getting an affirmative vote by both houses of Congress. Is that statement binding on the next administration, legally binding?
Well, first of all, Mr. Sherman, it's great to see you again. You may have missed the fact that I'm no longer in the U.S. government. I live in Colorado.
I'm asking you as an expert.
So,
if you'd have you were invited because you are an expert.
Yeah, I would like to defer my answer on this particular issue to some of my colleagues who are closer to it than I am. I think
they're even further from being parts of the administration than you are. But if one of them claims to have expertise on the matter, happy to hear from them.
Congressman Sherman, the chorus does not allow South Korea to declare Kaesong to be part of.
No, it calls for serious negotiations between the executive branches of both governments,
right,
which may designed, in the view of some, to lead to that conclusion. The question is whether Congress will have congressional approval would be necessary.
Right. The witnesses, administration officials from both this administration and previous administration have testified, including before this committee, that it would require the approval, including legislative action by the Congress.
Legislative action. Did they ever say in anything legally binding that it would require the affirmative vote of a majority of both houses of Congress?
I will look for the quote.
The answer is the answer is no. That they deliberately prevented making that statement in anything legally binding. The proponents of the agreement fought tooth and nail, and with great success, to keep that out of the implementing legislation. And you can be sure that within this decade, goods from Kaesong will be coming into the United States. As the current ambassador of South Korea to the United States told a rally years before he became ambassador to the United States. This is an agreement that will put American workers up against North Korean workers in fighting for jobs in the United States market. And I'm sure that if we had had a representative of the American worker here today, that point would have been made before I came into the room. With that, I yield back.
Sir, if I could comment, Deputy U.S. Trade Representative Morantis testified in April 2011 that any change to how Kaesong is treated under the agreement would require Congress to pass and the President to sign legislation.
Is that legally binding, or is that a Mr. Klinger, the point I'm making is that we got a press release instead of binding legislation. The point I'm making is that that statement is not binding on any administration, least of all the next one. And the cleverness of the proponents in giving us a press release instead of a provision in the implementing legislation demonstrates how successful they've been at achieving profits for major corporations and a loss of jobs for the middle class. I yield back all of my time.
Mr. Klinger, did you want to further answer his question, or?
Right. Well, there's also been questions about the rules of origin in the Chorus FTA and the idea that the rules of origin would allow North Korean products into the United States. That would be in conflict with existing U.S. laws and executive orders. For example, Executive Order 13570 declares that the importation into the United States directly or indirectly of course covering components, of any goods, services, or technology from North Korea is prohibited, and that any kind of import of North Korean products or components would require the specific approval by a U.S. government agency.
Mr. Chairman, if I can have some time after the witness speaks.
And the existing regulations would not be superseded by the Chorus FTA, and there's text in the Chorus which specifically identifies that it would not be in conflict with existing rules and regulations. As for the effectiveness of these rules and regulations, during the past 5 years, the total imports into the United States from North Korea is $8,000 of stamps. And during the past 4 years, the imports are virtually zero. So I think the regulations show that they have been quite effective.
Mr. Chairman, can I address that?
Sure.
First of all, the known imports from North Korea are $8,000. We have no idea how many North Korean components are contained in goods that come here from China, South Korea, Britain, or anywhere else. To stand here and sit here and say that we have been 100% effective on every item other than postage stamps is to misconstrue the practical world. Second, this committee and its chairwoman and I have introduced legislation to make those sanctions against North Korea statutory. Those efforts have been thwarted by the proponents of this agreement, so that all of the executive orders you talk about can be waived by this or some other administration, and the executive branch has been far less interested in sanctions than has this Congress, and far more willing to accommodate multinational corporations. But then finally, you claim that we will not be in violation of this agreement when goods partially made in North Korea and partially made in South Korea come into the United States. Yes, our current executive order, subject to change by a decision of just one individual without any congressional input, but our current executive orders would block that at the border. That would put us in violation of the agreement and allow South Korea to take back some of the concessions they made, putting enormous economic pressure on the United States to relent. We've been through this already.
I'm going to be unrelenting here and go on to Mr. Falamave.
I want to thank you for the extra time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Sherman has made his point and his concerns concerning some of the provisions there in the free trade agreement, and I'd like to follow up just for my own better understanding of the specifics and his concerns. And correct me if I'm wrong,